Hello and welcome to Vermont Film Essentials. My name is Lincoln L. Hayes.
I am David Metzger.
This week we are talking LAvventura from 1960 because David likes to pick movies that make me sleepy. When did you first see this film, David?
So we had an Italian cinema class in college, and this film was not a part of that. And the reason being was, so there was a student in the class, and he said, oh, no Antonioni films. That's kind of a shame.
No.
And the instructor said, yeah, it doesn't really do too well in college because I'll play it and then I'll look around and everyone will be asleep. And that, it has that kind of effect.
At least he knows his audience, your professor does.
Yes. And listen, I totally get it. He has a pacing all of his own, and it's certain. It's certainly not for everyone,
right?
And even people who are like hardcore fans and aficionados of this film and his films in particular, will openly admit, like, yes, they can be a snooze fest if you're not in tune to it and you're not, ready for it. And specifically on a day when there's snow falling and there's cats about and blankets and everything.
I told him before we started recording that I watched this morning on the couch under a blanket with a cat, and I almost fell asleep about 4 times. To the point where I was like, all right, I have to get up, otherwise I'm going to fall asleep and miss this movie.
Yes. And, this film comes out in 1960. It comes out pretty much at the same time as La Dolce Vita. And these are 2 big Italian films made by 2 big Italian directors. And both of them, one could argue that both of them have made the same movie. Yeah. But they are complete opposites of each other in terms of form and tone. And Antonioni was hard set that he wanted to challenge the form in such a way. He wanted to challenge the grammar of filmmaking. He wanted to challenge the, what a story can be and defy the expectations of, most specifically, the American audiences, but the Italian audiences as well. Before that, this is coming off of Italian neorealism, and he certainly wants to do something very poetic and very symbolic. He's not necessarily interested in making something that is an accurate depiction of Italy at the time, but he wants to, it's almost as if he wants to turn the camera inside the person and, for lack of a better way of saying, film the soul of the person and not necessarily the person themselves. So not exactly the city, but the soul of the city at the time. And Italy at the time, it was just coming out of the war, the old structures like religion and the political system had fallen at that time. And so people were kind of at a crossroads in their lives where it's like, do I want to still believe in the morality of the old structures, or do I want to lose myself in this decadence and selfish lifestyle? And that's certainly the case with La Dolce Vita, and it is the case here. I think it's actually good that we did this off the coattails of Days of Heaven, because they're 2 very similar films in a way where, there's no doubt that you're watching a movie. They are very cinematic pieces. And I think one of the great lessons of Antonioni is, how does he make such character-driven, introspective, emotional films look as cinematic as Lawrence of Arabia? Like, there's shots in this film where you're just like, wow. Like, he certainly knows where to point the camera and what to film in terms of a landscape.
Which, bravo to you, you were able to do with Northland as well.
Thanks.
You're welcome. I'm glad that we did this after Days of Heaven too, because yes, they are very similar, but this, on the scale of likability, is considerably higher for me because it does have a story, because things are happening, character relationships are developed. It's just, it takes a very long time, and some of them are... there are aspects of the story that make you scratch your head a little bit and go, why are we seeing this, and what does it have to do with what's going on? Also, it's a bit of a fairy tale in a way that, these people just fall in love with each other so soon after, I guess you could say it's because of the tragedy of losing their friend that they come together, but that's not really clear in the storytelling that that's why. It just kind of seems to be love at first sight. So you kind of have to accept that in order to accept the rest of the film. So there's a lot of, you give it a lot of leniency as you're watching it, more so than something like Days of Heaven where you're just asking why and what's going on.
Right.
Because the filmmaker intentionally isn't telling you. Whereas this, it's just kind of, this is one of the more slice of life films that we've done where, because it is 2.5 hours long, you feel the passage of time that the characters are feeling almost. I mean, this takes place over the course of several days, but it's only several days. But because he's giving so much length to it, when you are with the two leads in the hotel, and you see that the romance is blossoming and they're coming together, it almost feels like that is natural. Like, okay, I'm on the journey with them, but then you remember that it has only been a couple days, and it's like, okay, you guys need to get some stuff figured out, because 2 days ago you were engaged to this chick who didn't want to be with you anymore, and now you're head over heels for this other chick, and then by the end of the film, spoilers, you got some other chick. My main takeaway from the movie was, well, screw that guy. Because, and that's kind of a bummer for the movie. I mean, it's obviously her story. We're following Claudia through her journey, and it is an introspective journey of what she wants and what she needs in her life. So that comes through, but you think that it's going to be the tale of this couple, and then he betrays her, and you're like, oh, yeah. And when the movie's over, you're just kind of like, ugh, bummer.
Right.
It's a bummer ending, unlike Days of Heaven, which was just like, throw something at the television, because that's a corruption of filmmaking.
Right.
But
and
different tastes. And
with Days of Heaven, like, you said something during that episode where, as a budding screenwriter, you're learning all of these things, and you're learning all of these, like, the structure of things, and what you're supposed to do, how you're supposed to structure and make a story cohesive. To get noticed or have a successful film, right? And then you see these films where it's like they seem to just say, to heck with that, and then they go on, and they're so revered and they get such acclaim that you kind of throw your head up in the air and you're like, well, why am I learning all of this stuff for? But I think
you have to learn fundamentals before you can break the rules.
Right.
And I see that in many art forms, and that's why, even in like an improv community, some of my favorite improvisers are the ones that break the rules. But they know how to break the rules because they know what the rules are. You look at someone like Terrence Malick, who breaks all the rules on his second film, and you're like, come on.
But I think
you have to do the work first.
I think that one could make the case for Days of Heaven, although it would take a much longer episode. But I think with LAvventura, I think he follows the rules closer than you might think.
Oh, absolutely.
It's just that, there's times where I'm thinking maybe each story is different, and each story requires a form that is different in order to best tell it. So if you're telling a story about a despondent, alienated, introspective main character, then one can make the case, well, then, okay, the story and everything about the story needs to feel that way.
Right. Which he succeeded in that.
Yes.
This is not... I'm going to improve my rating of this on Letterboxd, because thinking about it, I liked it better than Days of Heaven, so therefore it should have a better rating than Days of Heaven. And I didn't dislike it. It's just watching it you just want, and this happened in the first screening at Cannes, where the audience, first of all, booed it, and then in the scene where she's running down the hallway, they're just yelling, cut, 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 because there's also brevity in filmmaking, which he wasn't going for that. He was going for the opposite. He wanted you to feel every moment. He wanted you to feel everything that was going on.
Right.
And if you go into it knowing that, then yes, you're going to absolutely love this movie, because it just sucks you in, and you are there on the island as long as they are, and then you are in the street with her when she's surrounded by all the men, which was very uncomfortable. That scene was uncomfortable, and he did that very, very well. So if you have all of those things ready, if you know that this is the movie you're going to watch, then you're going to love it.
Right.
But if you look at the timer and you say 2 hours and 23 minutes,
good Lord!
Ooh, I still need to shower.
And I think this is for anyone. I think this is a hard film to watch and on first viewing get to the end and be like, yes, like that was an amazing film. Right. You know, you could if you're attuned to it, but at the end you're probably just like,
and it's over. Cool.
Okay.
Great.
You know. I think the final image is one of my favorite final images of a film, and even, you know, reflecting on it and putting, the more I add meaning to that final image, the better and more potent it gets.
Oh, of course, and that's the beauty of art.
Yes,
it's as much about what you put onto it as what it gives to you, and that's why, you know, you look at the art that people have in their homes or in their offices or things like that, and you're like, that means nothing to me. But it clearly means something to you, and that's why it's effective. And actually, I just had a thought. I want to decorate with final images of films. That would be dope.
Would it? Yes. But with this film, like, there was always in film school, there was always, okay, if I'm into storytelling and I'm into screenwriting, then there's no better place to look than American cinema, because American cinema, of all the things that it does really, really well, it tells a great story. Right. With European cinema, it was always, they were tone pieces, they were very emotional, very character driven. So what this film, when I eventually did see it, similar to like La Dolce Vita and, you know, some of those other Fellini films, it's like, it's not American cinema in the sense that they're telling very cohesive, like, page-turning stories. Right. They're not good yarns. Right. But
you could summarize this film very simply. It's got a lot of life in it, I guess is the way to say it. Right. And it doesn't feel, it's so interesting, because while it is a long tale, it's almost like an epic love story. But nothing happens in the epic. It's just, it's the Hobbit's tale, but they just go to Mordor. Right. And we hear about the whole thing. Nothing really happens to them. And it's just a long trip.
And it's about, like, you know, all the plot points are emotional, interior plot points rather than something external happening to them.
This is also like watching a book, because there's just so much description and so much development of everything that's happening. Right. I mean, especially the scenes on the island, all of that could very easily have happened in 2 scenes. Like, we could have got the gist that they were on the island, but he gives it the time so that you feel like, wow, we have exhaustively looked for her and we cannot find her anywhere. And then new people come in and they're like, oh, we've done all this work too. Right. And you realize she's just gone. She disappeared, and you never learn why. Right. And that's the mystery.
And like, you know, a couple seasons ago when we did Picnic at Hanging Rock, similar type of thing. It's like, it's not about finding out about the disappearance, it's about what that disappearance means to the story and to these characters. And when you're telling, you know, the way I read Claudia's character is that, you know, at the beginning of the film, you know, she's a very lonely interior person, but she covets a lot of her friends' possessions. You know, she wants to be the one up in the loft making love to her fiance. You know, she wants to be the one that's getting all the attention on the yacht. She wants to be the one that jumps into the sea and is having fun.
Yeah.
And so there's almost a way that like she, by coveting her friend so much, she caused her disappearance.
Right.
She wanted her to be wiped out so that she could take her place.
Yeah.
And she does. She has an affair with the husband.
Yeah.
And then she just finds out that it's all for nothing.
Yeah. I don't actually want any of this.
I don't want any of this, and he doesn't even really want me
Right.
any more than he wanted her.
Right. And that's the saddest realization, that she's like, oh, I thought I meant something, and really, no, he just wants women.
Right.
And that final scene with him on the bench and her behind him, it makes me ask the question of, is this a comment on the time, like be a good woman and stick with your man kind of thing, or is it more of you can make your own choices, so try to make the best one? It's since there's no dialogue, since it's just the two of them in the shot, it leaves you with questions,
right,
which is great.
Yes.
Because if he's just out and out says, and then they get back together, the end, you're like, nope, get out.
And it's tough because it's such a loaded image. And again, like, you know, I'm in no way saying this is the right way to read this final image, but you know, you've got the traditional old structure on the right in the church, and then you've got the openness of the landscape and the mountain in the distance, and they're right there in the middle of, you know, what is it to be a good person? What is it to be a moral person? What is it to be a human being? And you know, do I put my hand on the shoulder of the man that just broke my heart to say, you made a mistake, but I can forgive you and we can kind of get through whatever it is this life is together, or is it all hopeless?
Right.
Does it all mean nothing? And it's, you know, and those are heavy thoughts and heavy imagery to take on a first viewing and in a film of its own.
Right. It is a very strong image because it could have been something even more blatant than just like the tower of the church. It could have been a religious symbol. You really could have driven that home, that like, this is morality, this is religion, this is everything that we are, this is being an Italian.
Right.
And then off in the distance is hope, there's promise, there's the unknown.
Right.
And it's a proximity thing too. And it's interesting that it isn't the other way around, that the church isn't on the left and the mountains on the right, to be like past and future. So it's a conflict for the characters themselves, because it's like, well, this is what we know, this is the logical way to go, but that could be pretty good too. And her apprehension to put her hand on his back, I read it as also like, she wants to comfort this man that she does care for, but at the same time he has betrayed her. So she doesn't know, at least I read it this way, she doesn't know what he's going to interpret the touch to mean. If I touch him, am I absolving him? Because I don't want to absolve him. But if I touch him, am I just comforting him? Do I even want to comfort him because he's hurt me too? Right. Yeah, it's a very loaded scene, and this movie is pretty great in the fact that you don't get the shift to it being her film until well into the third act. Because even when they're together, it still kind of feels like both of their movie. But then I think it's the scene, the first time she asks him to say I love you, and he doesn't do it. And you're like, ooh, this, A, is 2 days. 2 days you've been together. And B, you're not on the same page here, guys. Right. Because you're head over heels for this guy, and he's liking it. He's having a good time. And, you know, just from my own personal experience in life, if you get with a cheater, they're probably gonna cheat again. It's just kind of how human nature is. Right. So anytime somebody jumps into a relationship that's, you know, an affair, you kind of got to be like, well, this is going to end because it started as an affair.
There's also a way to look at the structuring of this film, and it's, you know, it's almost as if he's saying, like, I have to draw this out, and I have to fill it with situations and imagery that is long-winded and, you know, could be boring, because at a certain point they've got to, you know, the disappearance is lost in their mind, and they're so fixated on each other that they forget that the reason why they were together in the first place is to look for their friend.
Right.
And there's almost a point in the movie where, as a viewer, you get so sucked up in the situations in them that even you forget.
Right.
You're like, in any other movie, it would be like, you know, hammer it home every scene, like, you haven't found her, where is she?
There'd be pictures of her in the bedroom while they're, you know, having sex and stuff, and you're like, guys. But it's not until she says something that you're like, oh yeah. Remember?
Right.
Your friend disappeared?
Right.
Your fiance?
And like, and that is about, like, you know, what does that say about us as her friend?
Right.
That we're at a point right now where we don't care.
There's a play by Neil LaBute called Mercy Seat that is very similar to the second and third act of this film. It's about two people who, on September 11th, were very near the attack site. And after that day, they both just go off the grid and disappear because they're having an affair with each other, and their spouses both think that they were in the towers or in the area and were killed. So they're just hiding out together because they're like, well, now we're free, now we can do whatever we want, but then the guilt of what they're doing overtakes them, basically. And that's similar to what happens with this couple, where, yeah, they're kind of hot for each other at the beginning, and then after a while they have to go, well, yeah, but Anna, remember? Remember your fiance? Like, I keep going back to that for her character, and I'm glad that she's the one that says it, because Anna was her friend too, and for him, that also just develops his character as being kind of the cheating scumbag. But he also does a great job of making him sympathetic too, because he has that great scene where he's talking about how he misses being an artist and a creative person, and he just kind of shifted his focus, and he's like, I never thought I'd have a lot of money, but now I do, and what am I doing with it? So you do feel bad for him. The characters are incredibly well developed, which makes sense because we had the time. And
you get to spend a lot of time with them.
Yeah.
Which is
even
nice.
The secondary characters, you really get to know them. Julia especially, her subplot is so sad. So, and you get it right from the first time you meet her, and you get it enough times that I was like, oh, okay, this is actually going to be important. And then it ends up being, you know, a secondary storyline. And that scene with her and Claudia is one of my favorite in the movie, where she's met this 17-year-old painter who's just kind of infatuated with her, and she's loving the attention because she's married to this like 50-year-old guy who kind of treats her like crap like, through the whole movie. And she even comments, and she's like, he's being really mean to me. But Claudia's like, I can't talk to you right now. So she kind of hooks up with this 17-year-old, and she makes Claudia come with her as like an excuse and a buffer of like, oh, well, I can't. You should get with Claudia because she's prettier. And it's such a like calculated scene. It's like a chess match, and you can see all the pieces. And Claudia knows what she's doing. And it finally comes to a head when she's like, hey, you're married, remember? She's like, you know what? Go tell my husband. Go tell him that I'm having a great time. I don't care. And then when she eventually gets her out of the room, she's like, what's it going to take for me to get some peace? And she goes, for you to shut the door. And then she does, and you're like, oh, oh, that was a great scene.
Yeah.
That was one that I sat up and I was like, oh, I like this. Oh, this is good. That's some meaty writing right there.
And it's all like all these characters just being terrible to each other.
Yeah.
Throughout the course of the film.
And it's human nature too. Like no one is an out and out villain. You know, even the old guy who's just grumpy, he's just an old guy who's grumpy. He's not singling her out per se. That's what would happen in that relationship of like an older guy marrying a much younger woman and just getting tired of her? Because that happens all the time, and it's tragic, but they probably weren't in love when they got married, so that's how it goes.
Right.
It shines a light on just the tragedy of relationships when they aren't based on love. And you see that with the main character's relationship. They get together out of a desire, him, it seems, for something new, and her for something that her friend has, because like you said, she covets what she doesn't have. And then as soon as they have it, they're like, oh, well, this is fleeting. Yeah.
And just a thing about the cinematography, like I remember reading an essay about Antonioni in general, but they used LAvventura and I believe Red Desert as examples of that. What he does in terms of the cinematography is he uses psychological landscapes, so that there is a symbolic reason as to why we begin in the very poor town that we begin in, and then we're out on the sea, and then that rocky terrain and what that symbolizes about the what happens on there, but also what they're going through in terms of the inner turmoil of losing their friend and having to look for her and not knowing what happened.
Right.
And you can kind of chart that throughout the whole film as to where they are in terms of scenes that would be in any other film. It would just be a simple over the shoulder back and forth between characters. But if you look at who this character is and what's behind them versus what the other character and what's behind them, it starts to kind of build this psychological landscape. And it tells the story. It even tells the story visually, where European cinema is not necessarily known for that.
Right. This is a film that you could watch without subtitles or without sound, and you can kind of get it. Like, again, it's in Italian, so I'm watching it with the subtitles. And of the films that we've watched that are foreign language films, this is by far the easiest to follow. Because even if you miss some of the dialogue, you look up and you see what's going on, and you're like, okay, get it.
Right.
It's very, very visual. It's excels at visual storytelling, for sure.
And it's almost like it is as psychologically dense and visual as a Hitchcock film, but rather than using, thriller plot points,
Right.
it's using emotional plot points. So it's almost like an emotional thriller.
Right.
And the fact that if you agree that the correct translation and what is meant by the translation is the adventure, even that is kind of like a middle finger to
Right.
anyone who is looking at this and wanting.
Yeah, this isn't the talented Mr. Ripley.
No.
This is, oh, Mr. Ripley, good to see you. And then you'd have a conversation, and then that lasts 3 days, and then by the end you're like, oh wait, you killed Jude Law? Spoilers. Yeah, there's just, it's a gorgeous, gorgeous film. And as I'm sitting here and I'm thinking about it, my rating is going up, because kind of like Days of Heaven, you need to look at it as one thing.
Right.
You can't look at it sequentially as a film. You need to look at it as a giant photograph of a relationship. And then you can pull yourself back and you can put all the pieces together quicker.
Right.
And be like, okay, in my mind this could be an hour 15, but it's drawn out, and that gives it all to you. And that's why it's also like watching a book, because you have this great source material that you could then whittle it down and make it shorter. So like the movie version of this book
Right.
could be a solid hour 20.
Right.
And you'd get everything that you need, but anybody who saw this movie first would be like, oh, the book's better.
Yeah. And even like with films like this, it's like there's some movies that you watch and you're like, well, this is just terrible, and I'm not gonna,
Yeah.
It's not worth it. Like, I get,
Oh yeah.
like, there's nothing behind this movie other than making a trashy movie.
Right.
And I hate being the one to judge a film in that way, but you know that there's films that you watch and you're like, they didn't care, and it shows. And then there's films like this where it's like where you watch them and you're not necessarily a huge fan, or you're not standing up and cheering about it, but you can say, like, they obviously, someone cared, and there's a point to this movie. I don't get the point, so whatever.
Right.
But then there's films like this.
That's Days of Heaven.
That's Days of Heaven for you. But there's films like this where it's like, you see them and there's something about them that you know you should enjoy.
Yeah.
You know there's something about it that you've got to get to the bottom of. And I think what that is that is when you can pinpoint, when you can say to yourself, okay, the filmmaker had a distinct impression with this film. Like when they had a decision and they had a vision that they were trying to get through. And with this film, it's, you know that there's something that he is saying with these images, with the way he's telling the story. And sometimes you just got to get to the bottom of it and just got to figure that out. And that's where I come from, where it's like, I got to figure out what they meant by this and why on first viewing it didn't work for me.
Right.
Perfect example of this is Jackie Brown.
Yeah.
Quentin Tarantino's Jackie Brown. Okay. So one, it's coming off of the heels of Pulp Fiction, so I was looking for Pulp Fiction.
Yeah.
Right.
You want Pulp Fiction 2, the Jackie Brown story.
Right. But then you watch it and you're like, man, this is just a lot of people sitting around in rooms and talking. Like, I don't know what is going on with this film, and I can't get into it. Yeah. But then at a certain point, after, like, I knew that there was something about, like there's something wrong with me. Yeah. I have to like this movie. It's got to be me. So I keep watching it, and at a certain point, I'm like, oh, I get it. Like, there's this plot that I'm getting hung up on. Yeah. But if I just sit back and listen to the fact that these people that are talking are hilarious, and there's so much going on underneath the dialogue, it's a ball. And I say, like, until I see Pulp Fiction, I'm like, Jackie Brown is his greatest movie. Yeah. But that's the same thing. It's like, you know that there's a great filmmaker at the helm. Absolutely. And you know that there's a filmmaker that is completely adept, and he's telling his story. He's telling their story their way. Yeah. And sometimes you just have to dig a little bit to figure out what that is. Right. And sometimes the movie opens up and you fall in love with it. And sometimes you don't.
I'm gonna deliver this directly into camera. I apologize for my initial review of this film. I will be amending it. I'm bumping it up to 3.5 from 1.5, which is a big deal, because the more we talk about it, you have to. This film is a test. Like, you have to do it. Yes. It's an endurance test. You watch it, it's over, it's done. It's kind of like the Whole30. Here's a weird analogy for you. You get through the first 2 weeks of not having any sugar, and if you can do that, then you're going to be fine. Yeah. If you can get through the first hour and a half of this movie, you're going to make it, and it's going to be fine. And when you're done with it, you're going to walk away and you're going to be like, oh God, I never want to do Whole30 again. Just give me all the cheese and all the candy bars. But then you think about it and you're like, different from Whole30. You're like, well, now I just don't want just all cheese. I don't want just all the sugar. It's like you've learned something. You've come out of it on the other side. And you think about it and you look back on it as a whole. Right. And you can see the benefits of it. You can see that I lost 10 pounds. And that's how I feel about this movie. It's like wine. It's opening up. You're getting more out of it. It's like, oh, it was pretty tart when I opened it, but now I'm getting a lot more earth tones and all this other stuff. Yeah. And especially with a story like this, where you have to, at a certain point, just like with Picnic at Hanging Rock, there's a certain point where you're like, you got to say, I'm okay with not knowing why. I'm okay with not knowing what happened to her. This film also doesn't have much of a score to it. There are only a couple scenes that have anything really going on. Yep. And then full stretches where there's just none. And since it is a mystery, as an American moviegoer, you want something like Hitchcock where the music is going to inform me that something's going to happen or that this scene is important, pay attention.
Yep.
Or give me some kind of emotional cues. Part of me wishes that this had some kind of underscore or orchestration or something just to fill in those long pauses with something to keep me going. But then the other half is like, no, that's going to change it.
Right.
That's going to do something that he wasn't intending.
And there's certain points where you think, oh, he is doing that, but he's doing that with natural sounds. So there's there's a scene where they're looking and it's the wind, and what the wind is doing, if you really listen to it, is doing what the music is supposed to be doing.
Right.
And there's
it's swelling and it's swirling.
Yes.
And you're feeling all of it. And holy crap, he shot a tornado. A tornado happened while they were on that island. A, one of my two biggest fears, tornadoes. B, what a cool shot. Because he just looks out and you see it in the water. And I was like, oh, weird, is that a tornado? And then it pans up and you see it and I was like,
pretty cool.
Because this is 1960. I mean, yeah, you got stock footage, but who has stock footage of a tornado at sea?
Right.
It's not, a tornado ripping through a mobile home park or anything like that. It's right there.
And that's why, I've never had the luxury of being able to shoot in a studio.
Yeah.
But that's why, even if I had that luxury, there would still be a part of me that's like, I really want to go out into the location, because when you see these films, especially from this era and especially from this Italian films from this era, you get that feeling like they were out in the thick of it, and things just happened, and they just happened to have a camera, and the director or the cinematographer was knowledgeable enough to just say, turn it, let's get it.
Yeah.
I can use this. I don't know how yet, but I can.
Different than a Terrence Malick method, which almost just seems disconnected.
Right.
Like, oh, we can use this in the story, as opposed to, oh, that's neat.
And with him, it's like to talk about Terrence Malick for a minute, like, there's interviews with his editors where it's just like they're like, we have buckets of footage of just nature or birds or something going on that has nothing to do with the story. It has everything to do with the surroundings and building whatever that tone is that he gets.
Right.
And he said we have buckets of it, and just knowing that they're there just to put wherever we think it belongs. And that's where it's like, there's such an arbitrary feeling to that, where it's just like, well, you could just do anything then. You could just put it anywhere.
What's the point?
What does it have to mean anything? Yeah. But sometimes they're like, you think that, but then you're editing the story and you just put something there, and for whatever reason, it just...
The juxtaposition works.
Yes. And with this, I think he's a little more controlled, and he's not as haphazard filming whatever it is. That just happened to be a thing where it's just like, well, we got to get that. Like, look how it looks.
Absolutely.
But I remember reading an interview where he was asked, do you storyboard, or how do you plan a shot? And he's like, well, the actors show up on the day in the location that we've chosen. I have them do the scene, I watch them do the scene, and then I make a documentary of the scene they just did. And he's just like, I just intuit where the camera should go and what should be there.
I respect that.
I like that.
I like that a lot. Because, you can try to control every aspect of it, but ultimately something's going to change, something's going to be wrong or different, and you have to have that flexibility. And that is on the positive scale of the Terrence Malick craziness of, well, I just don't care. I'm gonna shoot your feet. I'm gonna shoot this. Oh, there's a plant over there. Just keep doing your dialogue. Because that, I guess if I were Terrence Malick, I could definitely see how that would help my process. But as the cinematographer, as the lighting guys, as the grips, as everybody who's standing around going, what is he doing?
Right.
That is incredibly frustrating.
And that's what kind of that's what drives me up the wall, because I know that there are times when I'm filming where I'm like, ooh, I wish I could get that, but it's like
that's what second unit's for.
Right, that and like it's like there's a scene that we have to get, and time is running out. And
in that film in particular, you shot everything at magic hour, so it's like we have 20 minutes.
Right. And that's why like a lot of with Northland, like a lot of those B-roll things that I did, like I did that well before. Yeah. And was trying to
like, I was the purpose of second unit.
Here's my time to do these types of shots.
Yeah.
And yes, I had buckets of endless footage that I pretty much knew where I wanted to put it.
Sure.
But it could have changed.
And that's also the beauty of shooting your own film, because you have it already storyboarded in your head. You may have not drawn it out, but also as someone contributing to the editing, because you didn't personally edit it, but you worked with him very hands-on, you know where those shots can go. You know how, and then you ended up doing that with the voiceover, and you put it in over the forming.
Yep.
Because you knew you had it, and you knew that atmospherically and emotionally it fit with what you were doing. And it wasn't just like an extreme close-up of a grasshopper eating wheat for 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And that's the difference between you and Terrence Malick and Antonioni. And it's very clear you're influenced by these guys, because you know how to throw those in, but you also know how to shoot a landscape perfectly so that you get how small the person is amongst this giant world. And you see how they are in their element and all that stuff, and it's very effective. But you're also an economist.
Right.
You don't make a 2.5-hour movie when a 50-minute movie works just dandy.
Right. I always, now I feel like just because of that time crunch, because of like film festivals don't take anything over 90 minutes.
Right.
But I wonder if that wasn't there, what I would do, because I feel like because of that time limit that was enforced, that I was then forced to be economical.
Sure.
But I also like to think that I just like to be economical because it's effective.
I would hope that if you had made Northland more than 90 minutes, you or Peter would have looked at it and gone,
we can't do this.
We don't need it to be this long. This film works in its length if you look at it as one story, one big thing, because you need that much time. Watching it for the first time, as we've said, is just a struggle because you're just watching the clock going, how much more story is there to tell?
Right.
I know where we're going. And it's not until you're done watching it that you can step back and go, yeah.
Right. And it is one of those things, like especially on the first viewing, because after that point where we're like, okay, there's a disappearance, but this movie is not about a disappearance the way I would think that this movie was going to be about the disappearance.
Right.
And once you get into that, you're like, well, how much of this is there, and where is it going to go? And I'm getting frustrated that I don't know where this is going to go.
Right. It is more of a frustration of, I want to solve the mystery. How come we're not solving this mystery? Right. And the mystery is just a MacGuffin.
Right.
Her disappearance is only there for these two characters to come together. Which, sorry, Anna, that sucks that it's your purpose in this story, but that's your purpose in this story. You disappear, and then these two people come together and then come apart, because that's unfortunately the nature of many relationships, especially when people come together in those circumstances.
Just a thing about Antonioni. So this film is part of a trilogy of films. So there's LAvventura, and then there's La Notte, and then L'Eclisse. They systematically get more boring. But the next one in the trilogy, La Notte, it was kind of between this film and that film, because that film too is about, it's one night in a relationship. A couple goes to a party, and over the course of the party, their marriage is falling apart, and it all kind of culminates in this party where one of them becomes unfaithful. And the night is about them coming to terms with the fact that maybe their relationship is doomed.
Right.
And again, you know,
that sounds real fun.
It's a lot of fun, but also like kind of like with this film where it's like the true, whether or not you absolutely adore the film and can get through most of the film, the reasons why I like them is because just that one thing of how he makes a story like that, which is very emotional, very interior, so cinematic. Like, I don't know, he's got some deal with the devil where it's like he's just shooting a character talking, and it's, again, it's as cinematic as something that Sergio Leone would do in Good, Bad, the Ugly, or, you know, or anything from Lawrence of Arabia. It's just he's got something about the composition and something about the way he uses the background.
Yeah. And it's also strong writing too. Like this is a compelling story. It's a compelling strip. There's never a moment when I'm like, I'm bored by what is happening or what people are saying, or, oh, this dialogue is corny or anything like that. It's just he gives it so much extra flavor that after a while you're just like, oh, I'm full. Yeah. Oh, I am full on this cake of a movie.
Yeah.
And by the end of it, you're like, no, that was a damn good cake. See, you've changed me. In 46 minutes, you've changed me.
I knew I could do it.
Well, I also came out of this one not angry. So there's a very good chance that I'm going to like it better than the one that I was literally yelling.
Any more trivia?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. LAvventura is also Italian slang for a fling. So double meaning.
That's the thing. Like I always thought that I just took it as the translation as the adventure, and he did that just to be funny.
Yeah.
But that actually makes more sense.
Yeah. Right. Anna diving into the water is actually the assistant director wearing a women's bathing suit because Leah Massani was in the hospital because during production of this film she had a heart attack and was in a coma for 2 days. That's really sad. Antonioni was charged with obscenity and immorality because of this film, and it was highly censored in Italy. The sex scenes, which are pretty tame. I mean, there's the one that's, oh no, I'm confusing this with Jessica Jones now because we watched that last night. But eventually those charges were dismissed because they're like, yeah, you're fine. The film company that financed the film went bankrupt in the middle of production, and the crew went on strike because they were unpaid, which I'm sure also added to some of the length of the film. Because here's a good comparison. Quantum of Solace was being made during the writer's strike. So Martin Campbell and Daniel Craig actually added to the script in lieu of having writers because they were striking. And that film is actually one of the shortest in the Bond canon, but it's also got the least dialogue because they're just like, well, let's just do more
action
shots and more action and all this other stuff. I thought that this was interesting, and it made me appreciate the film a little bit better, actually, as well. Antonioni had no interest in finding out what happens to Anna. This isn't about Anna. This is about Claudia finding herself. And reading that, I was like, okay, yeah, I can get on board with that. Again, you just have to be prepared for a 2.5-hour movie, and then you're going to be fine.
Monica Vitti.
Who?
Claudia.
Oh, gorgeous. Not a great actress, though. Not a great crier, I should say. Rachel came down during one of the scenes when she was crying, and she's just like, she's not very good. And I was like, no. But she's good in other scenes.
She's good at, I don't know, she's good at the introspection and the contemplation, not so good at the emoting, the excess, and
It's also 1960s in Italy, and I don't think that was a big part of their cinema at the time. She was still doing the old Hollywood crying of like,
right.
She wasn't emotionally connected to it. The guy, the main lead, his crying at the end, that was good. That was believable because he wasn't like, oh no, poor me. He was like, I suck.
Yeah.
And that you can kind of forgive him a little bit because he knows that he did wrong and he's not trying to change her. He's not trying to, win her back or anything. He realizes what he did was selfish and awful. And he's just like, I suck. I'm the worst. She's like, yeah. And that's kind of the last moment of like him admitting it and her acknowledging that he's admitted it. I'm not going to forgive you, but.
And this is where we are.
Yeah. Now what?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a solid ending. But by far, my favorite scene is Claudia and Julia with the painter. Because he's not a good painter either. That was funny too. She walks in and we see all these nudes that he's done. And it's like kind of like Picasso-esque of almost cubism, but like not realistic in any way. And you're just like, oh, all right. And she's like, oh, you're very talented. And I was like, is he? His faces are like trapezoids. But yeah.
So Sofia Coppola has been one to say that she's been influenced by this film, and especially if you look at a film like Lost in Translation, you can definitely see it. But yeah, I mean, it's one of those ones. It's not the one that I'm more inclined to take off the shelf and watch over and over again. Like that's more La Dolce Vita for me. But yeah, in terms of thinking about how to make a film that is very emotional and very introspective, how to make it cinematic and how to make it pop on the screen.
This is a great example for it.
Those are the lessons that I take from this.
Yeah. And I have to say, you've done well, sir. Because having worked with you on Northland and now seeing this, I'm like, there it is. That makes sense. Bravo! And thanks for picking it. I liked it.
Thank you.
We have some scheduling news for you.
Yes.
So next week's episode was going to be the end of this season, but we're going to add on a few more episodes so that we can take May off, because that just works better for us. So next week we'll be doing Stagecoach, which will be exciting. March 27th, we're going to do Apocalypse Now, which I am very excited to watch again because I haven't seen it since college. Do you have the unredone? Because I've only seen Redux.
Yep. So I got to give you that.
Yeah.
So yes, I have a DVD version and a Blu-ray version. They both have both versions.
Nice. Because I've never seen the
original
redone one. Then we're going to be off the first week of April because I will be out of town. Then we're going to do The Treasure of Sierra Madre. Then the Close Encounters of the Third Kind, which, oh boy. They showed it at Essex Cinemas a few months ago, and I missed it, and I'm mad, so I'm excited to watch it. Then April 24th, we're going to do Wizard of Oz, which I love because I played the Scarecrow in high school. And then we're going to wrap out the season the first week of May with Star Wars A New Hope because David's super nice and let me pick Star Wars.
Yay. And big news, so Tuesday, April 3rd, Main Street Landing has invited us back to host their free Tuesday night screenings, and we will be screening The Wizard of Oz for everyone to see for free. Yay.
And by we mean just David, because that's the week I'm out of town, which is the bummer. When she came back with that date, I was like, no, the week before, the week after, but that's the way it goes. So jealous about that. Also, if I can plug one more thing, my web series, Husband Training, premiered this past Friday. The first episode is out and available on the Pretty Beards Facebook page and YouTube page. David helped with it, and Rachel directed it. It's super fun. It's the third season, and it's been doing very well. So I'm looking forward for more episodes to come out and for more people to see it.
And I will say that while the last two films have been very challenging, these next 6 are just...
popcorn. Let's do it. Yeah, I'm excited. And I think they're all considerably shorter, which will be good. Not that long movies are bad. As David texted me today in all caps, some movies are long.
And that's okay.
It's perfectly fine. Yeah, so if you saw my Letterboxd when I first reviewed this movie, it's going to go up. Don't worry. I understand it now. I get the movie.
It just takes time. Sometimes you got to digest these things.
And sometimes you need to talk about it. And that's why TV shows are fun, because we can do that whenever we want. Cool. Anything else? Awesome. You can find this in the usual places, iTunes, Amazon, and Vudu for $3. This was an excellent Blu-ray. Recommend picking it up. I wanted to dive into the supplementals, but obviously I never have time for that. But it looks really, really good.
Did they? No, sorry. Never mind.
Whatever you were going to say was probably
Wrong.
really fun. Cool. All right. Next week is Stagecoach.
Yep.
Good stuff coming up. Until next time, I'm Lincoln L. Hayes.
I'm David Metzger.
Go watch a movie.